Hello everybody. In this Unity tutorial, we're going to make two buttons, and the button, when you press it, will make the other button disappear. So first I have a scene, okay, and first thing I'm going to have to do is add some UI buttons. So I go to gameObject.UI, and I'll go down here, and where is it? Button. I'll pick to add a button. So here in my game view, you can see the button, and here in my scene view, we're just going to have to, if we want to see it here, basically, I'll just switch to 2D mode, and then I'll double click and I see the button here. And if I zoom out, the area in white is basically my screen. So I could position the button here by using things like the move control, okay? Or I could position the button by docking it to the side by using the anchor presets. So if I just press this, the anchor presets opens up. But then when I hold down the Alt key, it switches to this mode, which shows docking positions. I could dock a button to the center of the screen and to any other corners. So I'm going to have my docking happen at the center, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to offset from the center one button to the left here, and then I'll make another button by duplicating that one, and this one I'll have it offset to the right. Okay, now since I'm only having these two buttons, I think I'll make them bigger. So I'll select the both of them and I'll set the height to twice as tall, 60. And maybe I'll just put the length up to like 240. Okay, and now for the text inside the buttons, I'm going to call this one button 1. Well, I'm going to have the text displaying called button 1. And I'm going to have the text for the other say button 2, just so we could distinguish between two buttons. Then let me just make the text bigger on them. There. Okay. Also another thing, let me just call this one button 1 for a name, and I'll call this one button 2 for a name. All right, now we want something to happen when we press the button. So we're going to need a script for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a empty game object here, and I'll call it like my controller, this empty game object. And I just need an empty game object because I'm going to attach a script to it. So here I'm going to add, just reset this for the heck of it. I'm going to add a component, a script, and this is going to be for my buttons. Button commands. That's a good name. Okay, now let me go to the script. Opening up here in Visual Studio. And you can see here is the default script. It's opening. Come on and finish opening. Come on. Let me see if I could do this while it's still doing its thing. Oh, I could. All right, it's doing its thing, but basically for this button command script, I'm gonna want a pointer to the two buttons. So I'm gonna have public button, and it doesn't know what button is. So let's go up here and add a using statement, Unity engine.ui, and we're gonna add a using statement for Unity engine UI. I'm just gonna put a comment here for the buttons. Okay. Okay, now button turned green. Yay, it knows what button is. So for first button, this is going to be button 1. And then the second button, public button, is button 2. 2, 2, 2. All right. And I like lining up my things. Is this ever going to go away? I'll just push it over somewhere else. Okay. So let's see. I don't think I need a private and an update, but I do need a function public. It has to be public so that the button control could see it. Public button pressed button button 1. That's the function it's going to call when I press button 1, and then I'm going to have another function, public void pressed button 2. Okay. So just to make sure, I'm going to put in here debug statements to make sure I get here. So I'll just put a little debug statement 1 if I press button 1 and debug.log 2, button 2. So I'm just putting these debugs in here so I could tell if when I press the button that the code actually reaches these spots. Now let me just jump back to Unity. And here in Unity, I'm going to select the first button, button 1. And I'm going to go to add something to do when it's on click. So I'm going to add, and I have to drag and drop the element that has the script on it, this controller. And then over here, I'll pick from the button command script. It should be public. What did I call it? Press button 1, press button 2, and it's not showing up. Why isn't it showing up? Do I have an error? Oh, I didn't press save. See, the star was there. I didn't press save. So now I press save. And now let's go back and select button 1. And here it still has the controller element with the script on it. And here's the script button commands. And there should be pressed button 1. I have it called that. And then for button 2, I'm going to add on click. And it's going to use something from the controller element, a script from there. Here's the button command script. And press button 2. Okay, so button 1, button 2, and they have their own click events defined to call a script function. Let me press play. And let's just look at the console window here. When I press button 1, it says 1 from the debug statement. When I press button 2, it says 2. Okay, so the code's calling to the right spot. Now let's do what we want to do in these functions here. Let's see, the controller script. I'm going to have to tell it what button 1 is. So I'm going to drag and drop that there. And what button 2 is, I'll drag and drop it right there. There. Now I have a reference to the buttons. So now if I press button 1, I want to have button 2 is the control. Button 2 dot is the game object. And I want to do set active button true dot game object dot set active false. Okay, so set active is basically this little check mark here if an object is active or not. So if I have button 1 selected and I uncheck it, then button 1 is deactivated and it doesn't draw itself. And if I check it, then set active is true and it would show itself. So that's how I do it through the Unity interface. If I want to do the same thing in code, this is how I do it in code. I get the game object and then I set active to false. So here if I press 1, then button 2 is going to disappear. And then over here, if I press button 2, then button 1 is going to disappear. Button 1 dot gameObject.setActive false. Okay, so that's the first step. Now let's check that out. Make sure I save it this time, and then I go back to Unity and press play. And there's the hourglass. Now I press button 1 and button 2 disappears. Okay, now let me try pressing play again. And I press button 2 and button 1 disappears. Okay, now let's make something that the button disappears and then it comes back after a moment or two. So let's say that here button 2 set active false, that makes it disappear, and then after like 3 seconds I'm going to make it reappear. So I'm going to make another function here. This one could be private, only the script needs to know about it. Private void, and I'll call it button appear, and I guess, yeah, that's it, button appear, bam. Ooh, but let me see, this is button 1 appear, and then I'll have another one for button 2, private void button 2 appear. Okay, so if button 1's going to appear, then all I have to do is the opposite of what it says here. So instead of saying false, I'm going to set active to true. Okay. And then for button 2 to appear, button 2, instead of saying false, I'm just going to say true. Okay, so the functions are here to make the buttons appear, but I need something to call them automatically, so I want to call them only after like 3 seconds, say. So here button 2 is hidden, and then I'm going to use a command called invoke. I give it the name of the function to call, button to appear. Okay, and then I give it the time that it's going to call it in 3 seconds. Okay, and the same thing when button 1 disappears, then I'm going to call invoke button 1 appear, and it'll wait 3 seconds. Okay. Okay, good. So now I'm going to save that, and let's see what happens now when I press play. Wait for the script to process. Then I press play, and I press button 1, button 2 disappears, 2, 3 seconds, and it comes back. I press button 2, 1, 2, 3 seconds, and button 1 comes back. Cool, that's great. And just one more thing about the setActive. Let's say that here we're only going to set it active to true if it's not active. So setActive sets true or false. How do we get the active state of a button? That could be with this here, button 1 dot gameObject.activeSelf is going to tell us if the button is active or not, if the checkbox is checked or not. So here we'll just add a little bit. If button ActiveSelf equals false, then go ahead and do the thing where we show it. We didn't have to do this as you see, but I'm just trying to show how you could check in the code if the button's active. Okay, if button 2 dot gameObject.activeSelf equals false, then go ahead and change it to true. All right, there we go, there we go. Save that, and it'll still work the same way. I just wanted to show how ActiveSelf is used. That's like to get the value. So here I press play, and I press button 2, and the first one disappears, then it comes back, or button 1, still the same thing, and it comes back. So there you go. We just did a tutorial on how to make one button make the other button disappear, and we also learned how to use invoke, which calls a function after a certain amount of time, whatever amount of seconds we want it to be. And we also learned how to set the check mark in code for having elements show or not with the setActive function. And you can get the value of if that check mark is checked or not with ActiveSelf.